It's
Instead,
your fault. You did the writing equivalent of the commentator's curse. So, Hello and welcome to the Autosport F1 podcast, and in this episode we'll be taking a look at the Brazilian Grand Prix, where Lando Norris took his 7th Grand Prix victory of 2025 so far. Andrea Kimi Antonelli got the best result of his rookie campaign so far by holding off a charging Max Verstappen for second, while Oscar Piastri could only muster 5th place and is now 24 points behind his McLaren teammate Norris in the standings with just 3 weekends to go. So it was a dramatic race, it was an exciting race at times, lots going on, lots of overtaking. So I'm pleased to say there's 2 people to join me to talk about lots of different storylines during the Interlagos weekend. The first is Jake Boxall-Legge, who is still out in Brazil. Jake, how are you doing? How was the weekend from your point of view?
Oh, it was very good, thank you. A lot of, let's say, unknown weather. You'd walk out the door and you think, oh, you'd be expecting a storm and it would be sunny. You'd walk out expecting sun, and there would be drizzle, the sort of drizzle that you'd usually get in England during the winter. So it sort of felt a little bit homely. But yeah, no, it's been a good trip so far.
Excellent stuff. Yeah, it certainly looked pretty good from where I was sitting. And also joining us is Autosport.com editor Haydn Cobb, who was on the desk during the weekend, so doing all the hard graft behind the scenes and never gets any accolades. So well done, Haydn. How are you doing?
You're very kind. I'm well, thanks. The weather here was equally iffy, had a bit of everything. So yeah, no complaints here though. Had a good race weekend, enjoyed it.
Yes, yeah. Well, let's just cover off some of the basics in our race report. So Lando Norris won the sprint race from pole position and then did likewise on Sunday in the Grand Prix. He never really looked under threat at the front, aside possibly from when a charging Max Verstappen, running a different strategy, obviously, because he qualified back in 16th and then started from the pit lane, got into the lead after Norris's second stop. Andrea Kimi Antonelli outpaced Mercedes teammate George Russell all weekend, and in the GP, he initially ran second before being attacked at a safety car restart by Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri. Now, that led to contact that put the Ferrari out and got Piastri a 10-second penalty, which is something we will definitely be coming back to talk about a little bit later on. And that really hindered Piastri's race and obviously took Leclerc out of it as well. So that meant that Kimi Antonelli was able to finish second in the end. But to do that, he still had to hold off Verstappen, who, as well as starting from the pit lane and suffering a puncture, still had to come through third and was pressuring Antonelli at the end, having stopped for soft tyres in the closing stages and overtaken Russell. Looking at some of the other stars, Ollie Behrman once again put in an impressive weekend for Haas with a run to 6th place, while a one-stopping Liam Lawson just managed to hold off a train of cars, some great racing actually in the midfield, for 7th place. In the Drivers' Championship, Norris now has a 24-point lead over Piastri, and you think just a couple of races ago he wasn't even ahead. It's pretty big turnaround at the front. Verstappen is 49 behind now, with just 83 points still on offer. And the other big change from this weekend was that it was frankly a dire event for Ferrari, and they have dropped from 2nd to 4th in the constructors' table. Mercedes now on 398, Red Bull on 366, and Ferrari 362. So Mercedes edging ahead in that second place battle. Right, well, let's get into a bit more in depth with the debrief. I'm going to come to you first of all, Jake. We've got one McLaren dominant again, Lando Norris. I mean, 2 poles, 2 wins. Can't really get much better than that, even though he was a bit disappointed at the end. We'll come to that later. But Oscar Piastri struggling, mistakes, not on the pace. So how much of it do we think is the changes to the car? I know that early in the season, McLaren made some tweaks to make Norris feel more comfortable. And how much of it is, you think, just momentum with Norris and Piastri's in a bit of a rut?
I think it's a little bit actually a carryover of Austin, Mexico. Now, what Andrea Stella's theory behind that is simply down to driving style, simply because Norris can perhaps energize the front tyres a little bit more. He's a little bit more equipped to deal with low grip conditions versus Oscar Piastri. Now, we saw early in the season, Piastri was very, very strong in higher grip circuits, especially those races in the Middle East and then your sort of traditional circuits like Barcelona and that kind of thing. And when we were building into the weekend, FP1 started off very low grip, but then it started to build and build as running continued, and it got to a point during sprint qualifying where actually Piastri was not very far away at all. But then we had an overnight storm. The circuit had then been washed away of all of the rubber that had been put down on Friday. So Piastri wakes up on Saturday and the circuit is way out of the window that he's a little bit more adept at dealing with. Now, he has been getting better at it, and actually, until before he crashed in that sprint race, he was sort of hanging on for third, not really challenging the front two, but in that fight for not a sprint podium, because there aren't any podiums in the sprint, but a top three. But then, yeah, I think the confidence went away. He had that crash, and then he had to rebuild his confidence. And ultimately, it was just a weekend where he was shy of Norris. Norris was on it from the get go. Again, the circuit grip wasn't particularly there, because the circuit, apart from Brazilian touring cars and other sort of club series, it's not really used a whole lot. And so F1 has to build that grip, and had to do it twice over the weekend.
And Haydn, how much do you think this is perhaps a function of? We've got to remember that Oscar Piastri is actually only in his third F1 season. It's easy to forget that because he's in the championship fight and he has that kind of cool as a cucumber persona going on that we've talked about. But actually, this is his first time going for a world championship. So do you think there's an element of that creeping in, or is it just as JBL says, it's kind of more a function of the nature of the tracks and circumstances he's found himself in recently?
You'd struggle to argue against that now, in terms of the pressure mounting, particularly when we came away from the European leg of the season and you had that useful championship lead, but then there was that papaya rules that was always being talked about, and were McLaren generally giving equal treatment or not? And then the mistakes started to come, and obviously you've got this element of, yeah, if he's struggling on low grip track surfaces, which we've had a fair few of in recent weeks, and will still have for Vegas. It probably just adds up to be an unfortunate set of circumstances they had to deal with, in combination with Norris clearly hitting a bit of a stride over recent rounds. And you add those together, you get the points swing. I, you're right in terms of Piastri. Obviously, it is just his third season of Formula One, and it's all new to him in the sense of that. But as a demeanor, as a character, I do feel that it's not necessarily the determining factor that's sort of let him down here. Yes, he's had some pretty high-profile crashes, but yeah, Baku, I think, aside, he shook that off, and it wasn't as if he was crashing into everybody too much. But then again, I'm just going to contradict myself by saying yes, Austin Sprint and Brazil Sprint largely let him down on that. But those were also for moves that he felt he was having to go for, and he was racing, and maybe just minor misjudgments.
Maybe this is a bit unfair, but I wonder whether Piastri is a bit fortunate that Max Verstappen is as far away as he is. Let's say Verstappen had won that race, had got more points over the last couple of weekends, and Piastri has still fallen back. Would McLaren? This is a question to either of you, really. Would McLaren be looking at maybe favouring the driver that's ahead because Verstappen's close, or do we think that they would just stick absolutely rigidly to that we give both drivers the fair crack at it?
I think this is something that Stella talked about on the lead up to the weekend. Ultimately, McLaren's job is to get its drivers a world title, but it wants to do it in a way that is equal for both. And it would rather not have to play favourites. And I know a lot of people will moan about that and go, well, you've got to make a choice at some point because you might lose it. I think Stella seemed to allude to the fact that McLaren would rather lose it than move away from its principles, which, I mean, that's a choice, certainly. Certainly a way to go racing. I sort of almost admire it in a way.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Actually, fun
Yeah.
enough you say that, because Zach Brown did an interview with Stuart Codling, our colleague, for the next issue of Autosport magazine, which is out in a few days. And in that, Zach pretty much said that, is that we could have a repeat of the 2007 season, obviously, which Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso famously took points off each other and let Ferrari's Kimi Raikkonen in. And he kind of did almost imply that obviously he doesn't want that to happen. He wants to win the championship. But actually, he'd rather stick to that. We've got two number ones, and if we lose it, someone beats us, then so be it. Which it's quite a remarkable thing to say. I'm not sure there'd be many other teams on the grid that would take it to quite that extreme.
But it's a big if right now, obviously, particularly post Brazil. But if they were to lose the drivers' title, that statement alone is going to come back to haunt them in a big way.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah,
the dynamics, it's fair to say, compared to 2007, well, at least on the face of it, are very, very different between their two drivers in the corresponding years. So, yes, the 2007 scenario could unfold, but it doesn't really feel like I generally don't feel that the two drivers would get into that situation. They'll fight on track. We've seen that, and they have come to blows as well. But there's generally not that underlying animosity, and yeah, I would say some deviant moves that were sort of made 2007 so famous, really.
Well, yeah, it was chosen as one of our favourite F1 seasons by Maurice Hamilton in our series early in the year. So check that out as to why 2007 was such a fantastic and also ridiculous in many ways season. But I mean, we're only talking about this because of Max Verstappen, aren't we? The fact that he's still in the championship fight, even if it's more mathematical than realistic now, perhaps, because he's been so brilliant. And he did it again at the weekend, didn't he? I mean, 16th in qualifying, start from the pit lane, get a puncture, and somehow finishes third. So, Jake, tell us quite how he was able to have that, and the team, to be fair, because also they worked on the setup. How were they able to turn that around to that degree?
Well, I think it's probably worth going into why they were in that position in the first place. So, obviously, the fun thing about the sprint weekend is the teams don't have very much setup time. So you've got basically at home at the headquarters, you're working on your baseline, which is based on previous years, based on your sim data, that kind of thing. So it got to the point on Friday where Red Bull had sort of settled upon a reasonable setup. It wasn't great, but it was enough to get Verstappen, what was it, fourth, fifth on the grid for the sprint. This carried him then into fourth in the race, but he later said, well, that was only because Oscar crashed, so it would have been fifth, and that's not really what Red Bull wanted. So after the sprint, they made quite a few changes. I think this was based on suggestions by Yuki Tsunoda, who said, well, his main problem is bouncing, and I'm not getting that, and we did this, and this on the setup. So Red Bull gravitated towards that. For some reason as well, they decided to cycle it back to the previous floor before Monza. Again, I think this was a suggestion that Yuki was stating, I'm using that floor, I'm not getting the bouncing that Max is in the middle part of the circuit. And ultimately it was dreadful, and Max couldn't get out of Q1. So basically undid all of that, changed again the suspension settings, put him back on the new floor, pulled him out of Parc Ferme, gave him a new powertrain, basically the whole turn the car upside down. Took quite a few risks with the setup. Actually, I spoke to Laurent Mekies after the race, and he said, this is the way that I insist that we go racing, that we try things and we risk things, and it's not always going to work. And in a sprint weekend, it does amplify that a little bit. It's not always going to work, but the team needs to take risks to.
It definitely
to be
did on Sunday.
No. Oh yeah, for sure. And then he was just able to. I think actually the best thing that happened to him in that race was the puncture, because I think he would have run aground eventually if he'd continued on that stint, because he started on the hard tyre, if you remember. And I think that first stint would have run aground. And by the way, how the field would have spaced out, I don't think he would have had quite as much success as he would have done had he not switched to the mediums.
I'm glad you said that, because several people mentioned it after the race, including Max himself, I think, we had the punctures. But actually, it came at, if you can have a puncture at a perfect time, it was then, wasn't it? You get off that tyre, still safety car, the pack is still compressed, and off he went on his. I mean, he still did a fantastic job, obviously. But Haydn, I mean, we should probably also say, and this is taking nothing away from Verstappen, as Lewis Hamilton proved back in 2020, if you've got a quick car and a fresh engine, you can actually overtake Interlagos. And Max did that, didn't he? He both had a good strategy and he just had raw pace.
Yeah, exactly. Things did largely come into his favour from that moment onwards. Phenomenal drive, yeah, made the midfielders look a bit sort of amateurish in that sense of darting through them, but with the superior package, power unit, yeah, came on to the preferred strategy. It was a fantastic to watch. And it's always curious. The big debate towards the end of that race was when he was in the lead after the leaders had taken their sector stop. It was like, does he take that risk of staying out and trying basically to defend the lead, but on aging tyres, or as he ended up doing, take what was it then, a third pit stop, and just continue his charge through the pack. Both McLaren and Red Bull sort of felt that the strategy they went for was the right one in the end, because it guaranteed well, not guaranteed, but gave the better odds for a podium versus a risky gamble for the win, which arguably a devil's advocate is contravene to what they said about taking risks. If they are a team that takes risks, then they don't pit stop and they try and defend the lead for 20 laps.
But I think it depends on the track, doesn't it? I think if it's Monaco or Hungary or whatever, you probably say, go on then, Max, you can run these tyres to the end and let someone overtake you. But Interlagos, they would have probably just cruised by him. So a racing driver is always going to want to be on an attack mode, aren't they, if they're given this opportunity?
Risk with a sense of realism.
Yes.
But that doesn't sound as good in PR. So, just go with the risk.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But yeah, and that final stint obviously had the small minor tyre advantage and came, probably one lap away from pinching second off Antonelli.
Well, it was interesting, wasn't it? Actually, we should get onto the Mercedes guys, because first of all, I mean, Antonelli looked like he had him covered. You could tell those last few laps after Verstappen went past Russell, because he had fresh tyres when he arrived at Russell. Russell wasn't happy with his balance anyway. That was fairly easy. But when he got to Antonelli, because he was just beginning to run out of soft tyre, that's when his charge began to fade. And Antonelli looked like he had him covered. And you think, going on to the last lap, he's too far away. Max was always going to have a little bit of a look, but you just keep going. He's like, right, job should be done. And then Antonelli made a mistake in the middle sector, didn't he? Which then gave Max a run at him towards the line. So, yeah, it was, but overall still a good weekend for Antonelli. So Jake, you first. I mean, Antonelli was ahead of Russell all weekend, which we haven't said that much about. He's had a tricky rookie season at times, and George Russell's been fantastic most of the season. So how much of this weekend do you think was Antonelli actually piecing it together in a way that we haven't seen before? And how much of it was Russell, because he kind of didn't seem very happy with the car at any point? So how much of it is Antonelli being on it, and how much of it is Russell not quite being his usual quick self?
I feel like you're setting me up to say a little bit of both.
You always say that. I'm going to get a T-shirt. The next time you're going to get a T-shirt with that across the front.
I think so. I think dial it back. I think one of the reasons that Toto Wolff suggested was that because Antonelli hasn't been to Brazil before, whereas if you remember, all of the European season, let's say Hoodoo, was circuits that he knew very well. Antonelli comes to Brazil. He doesn't know the circuit. He's never driven around here. I think that took the pressure off a little bit. I think it's quite an intuitive circuit for the drivers to learn as well. It's a real, it's quite a pure driving experience, but it's not overwhelmingly obtuse in terms of driving challenge. So I think that it was something that he was able to chime with. And again, when he's got quite an explosive driving style. It's quite high energy, and you compare that to George Russell, who's quite smooth. I think there was a disconnect between Russell with his tyres and getting them to work again. It's a little bit like the Norris and Piastri situation, a little bit of a disconnect in trying to get them work on the low grip surface. And Russell found the soft tyres in qualifying really not to his taste at all. Tried the mediums because the mediums just seemed to hold up better over a lap, and when you're sort of able to, I think the softs were just sliding and maybe a little bit graining too much, but that didn't really work either. Antonelli was just able to get in the groove. I think he got in the groove quite early, and he was just able to find that repeatability with the car, which again, you had to lean into sliding a little bit as a driver. You couldn't just sort of, because of the way that the conditions were, you couldn't just drive it in a conventional manner. You did have to kick the rear end out a little bit and try and deal with it. And again, as I say, Antonelli, he's got a really exciting driving style, and he knows how to handle that. And ultimately, it just seemed to sort of pay dividends a little bit. And what I was really impressed by, actually, was that defense against Max, particularly in those final laps. And you look at his GPS data, he's building... he's coming under a lot of intense pressure in turn 1 and turn 4, building a little bit of a respite in the middle sector, and then just absolutely sinking every bit of battery life onto the exit of Junção. And that just seemed to give him enough gap. I think it was about, by the time they got to the end of the straight, the braking zone for turn 1, he was just about 0.4 ahead, and that was just enough to stay ahead.
Yeah, he was really good out the chicane as well, wasn't he? The SNRS, he really seemed to get a good run out of there. So even when Verstappen had the DRS into there, he couldn't really get close enough to have a go. Haydn, I mean, we've talked about some of the good things about the weekend. We really should cover off Ferrari's woeful effort. I don't know really where to start. Well, I'll let you talk us through really. So how is it that Ferrari's managed to go from second to fourth in the constructors' championship in one weekend? I mean, it's terrible, wasn't it?
Yeah, not great. Not a lot to write home about, particularly in the Grand Prix, given for all intents and purposes it ended pretty early. You have to feel a bit of sympathy for Charles Leclerc in particular, because he was the biggest victim of the Piastri Antonelli Leclerc turn one accident, obviously, and absolutely taken out through.
And he was the most innocent as well. He didn't do
Yeah,
anything.
yeah. What can you say for poor Charles? But yeah, I think again we don't know where he would have shaken out the pace, but generally I think he would have been around the podium fight, or at least top four, top five, and yeah, wherever Verstappen lays in. But yeah, once he's taken out, and Hamilton's had his incidents, which started at the in the Grand Prix at turn one with a little bit of bashing with Carlos Sainz. And then a slight misjudgment, depending which way your opinion goes. We're trying to overtake Colin Pinto going up the hill. He goes left. Colin Pinto just slightly jinx left as well at the same time. The speed difference between the two means that he, taps, but obviously at high speed, the rear end of Colin Pinto, and his front wing comes off and gets lodged underneath his car, meaning floor damage. Obviously, pit stop, change the wing, but the damage under the car means it's almost undrivable.
The onboards were great though, weren't they? I mean, looking at either from his car or from any car that was behind him, he looked like a rally car. Like, fair play to be hanging on to the car for that long. I mean, he looked absolutely horrendous. I was surprised they didn't retire him a bit earlier, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess that was always the thought of safety cars or red flags. They're never too unknown in Brazil, and yeah, hoping for some sort of recovery, but it wasn't coming their way. Obviously, yeah, and the car wasn't going to repair itself during green flag running. So yeah, retiring around sort of mid distance with no real chance of points, and that's all she wrote, unfortunately. Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily say it was a fault by Ferrari in this occasion. Okay, Hamilton was really struggling in both sprint and Grand Prix qualifying out in the second segment of both of those. But yeah, then when you get stuck in traffic and you get incidents like that, yeah, he's at fault for a little bit of it, but that's it. There's no way strategy or outright car pace can really rescue there.
So, Jake, are we now at the point, do you think, where we can say Ferrari are going to have a win this season? I know Lewis Hamilton won the sprint in China, wasn't it? But in terms of a full Grand Prix, they're kind of running out of opportunities now, aren't they? Do you see in that car enough for them to actually get a win out of it?
I think it's going to be tricky, and the reason I say that is because they're sort of, when they have strong performances, it seems to overlap with when McLaren has strong performances, and so you kind of have to suggest, well, Ferrari is always going to find them in front when they had that sort of like moment at the start of the summer where they were, after the summer where they weren't performing particularly so well. That's when Red Bull was up there, so it's just difficult to see where that win's going to come from. And obviously you have to sort of take into account that we might have a crazy Las Vegas or a crazy Qatar, or something weird might happen in Abu Dhabi.
But Interlagos is normally the crazy race.
Yeah.
That's what we were hoping for.
But on pure merit, I just don't see where that's going to happen, unfortunately.
No, they need a big slice of
enough
luck. Yeah, which they didn't get in Interlagos. A big slice of luck from the remaining three to realistically have a sense of getting that win for Brie, the driver, as well. It's not to say they can't do it, but I think JBL's right in terms of pure pace. If everything goes to form over those final three rounds, it's unfortunately not going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I kind of hope it happens for Leclerc, really, because I think he definitely deserves, on the basis of the performance this season, he deserves a win. But yeah, maybe it won't happen. Right, well, let's have a look at the driver ratings now. This is Jake's favourite part, where we get to argue with him about his scores that he gives the drivers, all 20 drivers, which you can take a look at autosport.com on our plus section. And Jake, yeah, he has to give a driver score out of 10 across the whole weekend, so it includes qualifying and in this case, of course, the sprint. So we're going to do the top 5 scorers first, and then we'll have fun, if that's the right word, with the bottom 5. So Jake, you've got 3 drivers on 8 out of 10. Ollie Behrman, Liam Lawson, and Nico Hulkenberg, who are all involved actually in that fantastic midfield scrap. Well, actually, Behrman wasn't really; he was a little bit ahead of it, but there's a fantastic midfield scrap. I mean, Isaac Hadjar and Pierre Gasly seemed to be together for the whole time, passing and repassing. It was great stuff. I think probably if you'd watched the race just with the onboard of one of those guys, it'd have been entertaining. So, can you pick which one of those 3 drivers deserves to get the 5th place and be your top 8 out of 10 scorer?
I think on pure outright performance, I have to say Behrman, but I would like to give Lawson an honourable mention for doing a 52 lap stint on the medium tyre, making a one-stop work and precipitating that midfield action by holding everybody up, a la, what was it, Monaco, where he did that excellent hold-up play. It was the fact that his tyres were that old and he was able to keep ahead of all that. I think it was 8 cars in that midfield train. It was really, really impressive. But I think on balance of outright, it's got to be Ollie.
Yeah, annoyingly, I have to agree. What do you reckon? Oh, although just on that, I thought Isaac Hadjar's frustration at the end behind his teammate, who he felt he was quicker than, was palpable. Just looking at the screen and the body language of the car, you can see he really, really wanted to get past him, but didn't quite make it. But what do you think, Haydn? Do you agree with Jake?
I do on the whole. Yeah, that going back to racing balls, that could have ended up in disaster on that last lap when they clattered into each other, and it'd be a very different conversation. But yeah, I think Behrman, out of the 8 out of 10s, edges it just on that outright result and that performance. But this isn't necessarily just down to Brazil, because of course he didn't pick up all his penalty points from the weekend. But he's getting closer to that threat of race ban again. Picked up another penalty point for his coming togethers with Lawson in the sprint race, and obviously Lawson also picked up a penalty point for his part on that as well. But Behrman's up to 9, and 12 is a automatic 1 race ban, and he doesn't lose another one until May, I think, next year.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Which, okay, 3 points is a bit of wiggle room, but it's not a lot. All you need to do is fall foul of a red flag during practice, or a similar sort of misdemeanor, and he's got no response. So yeah, driver ratings, I agree with this, but the Behrman point is he needs to be, I think, a bit more careful and a bit more, which he has opened up to over recent weeks. He's spoken a lot about, and obviously when a couple of points came off after Mexico and he had that great result, he said a lot of learning from this year. So that would be a big thing that I can take. Behrman needs to take going into next season.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think when you finish 6th, well ahead of the midfield pack when your teammate Esteban Ocon, I know they had very different weekends and paths to their results, but Ocon not even in the points. I think Behrman's really followed up his Mexico performance very well there. But before we move on to the top 4, I'm going to query Jake's score for Charles Leclerc. 7. What more do you need from him? He even gave Piastri and Antonelli space in the incident that took him out. I'm not sure. I think I'd have been tempted to give him at least an 8. He looked like he was maximising the car all weekend to me. So just justify your 7 for Charles Leclerc.
Well, this is a difficult thing because, and it's going to look like I've ranked him unfairly, and I've thought that he was bad when he wasn't. But actually, this is more of a case of he didn't do a full race. He did, what was it, 6 laps or 7 laps?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And
I totally agree with JBL on this one. Yeah.
It's really difficult because you've got a whole race to go and he could do more amazing things, or maybe he has a bit of a mistake. The thing is, you're not ranking a driver that retires really, really early through no fault of their own, admittedly, on the same time frame as everybody else. And so I think it's a little bit unfair to have given him an 8 and a 9. I mean, based on what he'd done through the weekend, actually, the sprint race was good, but the sprint qualifying wasn't all there. Qualifying, he was absolutely excellent, and 3rd place, probably Ferrari shouldn't have been capable of that, I don't think. But it's difficult to rank someone on the same page as everybody else when you've done 60 plus fewer laps than them.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right, well, let's get you to pick a third then, a third place, because on 9 out of 10 you gave Kimi Antonelli 9, and of course Pierre Gasly 9. But Gasly really seems to like Interlagos, doesn't he? He was sensationally quick there, I think. So both 9 out of 10. I don't imagine anyone's going to disagree with those scores too strongly. But which one would you put ahead of the other for third?
I think it's got to be Antonelli, hasn't it? I mean, Gasly was hugely impressive, but I don't think that I can put a 1 point result above second place. Oh, I mean, I know it's obviously a function of the cars that they're in, but the fact that as well Antonelli had to absorb about 10 laps worth of pressure from Max Verstappen, whereas Gasly had a very, very different race indeed. He was having to. He'd qualified very, very well, and he was having to basically hold his own in that midfield battle. Actually did really, really well. Actually attacked quite a lot against drivers that probably have long since been in cars that have surpassed the Alpine. But yeah, I was very impressed by him.
Yeah, Haydn.
Antonelli was probably a bit unlucky not to get the full 10 out of 10. I know the reason why, being obviously his part that he played in the Piastri Leclerc clash. But beyond that, I thought he'd done absolutely everything he could from that car, holding off Verstappen at the end, excellent driving, just consistent all weekend. Like really didn't put a wheel wrong necessarily. But yeah, that's why I would pick him as your third in this scenario over Gasly. But yeah, top work to Gasly. It was amusing every time he spoke to the media after a day's action, and he just said, we just don't know why we're quick here and why we were so slow in like Mexico or other races. I'm sure they have an inkling, and you're right, maybe it is even just down to driver preference and strengths at Interlagos, because you said historically Gasly has always gone well in Brazil, but still maximised his own result, but just lacked that sort of shine to take it any further. So that's why Antonelli for me gets that third place in this scenario.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He looked like a future world champion, didn't he? Running at the front, he looked like it. And bearing in mind, he's still only 19. Imagine 19-year-old with Max Verstappen bearing down on you at the end of a Grand Prix is not probably what you want to see in the mirrors. Well, let's get on to the drivers that did score 10 out of 10. And I don't think this is particularly surprising that both Lando Norris and Max Verstappen have scored 10 out of 10 by Jake. So now, previously, I think we put Norris because of his dominant performance in Mexico. We gave him the first, but would you give him first again, Jake, of these two tens? I mean, I know obviously perfection is perfection and they shouldn't be able to separate them, but let's play the game anyway. Which one are you going to give first to?
I think if I was just doing it purely on the race itself, then Max would have the edge, I think. And it's really difficult because, again, it was so setup dependent, the fact that he was just absolutely nowhere until Sunday. And so how much do you penalise that? Because it's not his fault that the car's bad, but then you can extrapolate. This is the difficulty of doing the driver races, because then do you extrapolate from where the car is to the driver, or is it purely the driver's performance? It's where does one thing stop and the other thing end? But this was so clearly entwined within the car performance that I think when you look at what Max did on the Sunday, I think I have to sort of put him ahead on that basis. I mean, Lando was absolutely excellent throughout the weekend and basically looked unstoppable. But I don't think that he wasn't pushed. Let's say there wasn't as much urgency. There wasn't that need for him to enter that final little box of final 5% that he's got in terms of performance and use it. Whereas I think Max sort of very much was living in that box and throwing moves at drivers that you don't usually see. I saw a couple moves at turn 11 or turn 10 rather, and then into turn 12. I think it was just super impressive.
Yeah, they were well judged.
Definitely stellar by Norris, but I don't make these decisions in particular. But for me, Verstappen's drive will probably be one of the drives of the season when we come back to do a bit of season review stuff. I think I said during the race as well that if he did get second, it definitely would probably be the drive of the season. And well, I'm put debate now, but that's why I put him ahead. I would say that one we will remember a little bit like last year. Okay, fortune and in terms of the puncture coming at the right time, if such a thing can be said, and indeed set up unlocking the car performance. But yeah, like last year, it will be remembered at the end of the season as one of the standout drives of the year.
Yeah, and a more complicated race to execute as well, wasn't it? Because he was offset strategy, cars to overtake. It was a bit more of a complicated race for him to do. I mean, I think he probably obviously was helped. Obviously, Leclerc taking out Piastri penalty. Maybe he would have been fourth or fifth without that. But even so, I think I'd give him the number one slot for this one as well. So let's look at the other end, the bottom five of your driver ratings, Jake. And you've got three drivers on 5 out of 10. Carlos Sainz, Lance Stroll, and Franco Colapinto. So which one of those was the worst 5 out of 10?
I'll be honest, I'm not really sure, because they just sort of had very, very muted races. And I think probably if I had to pick the worst one, that's a difficult one. That's really difficult, because I think the part of Stroll had a pretty miserable weekend where there just wasn't really much pace, and I think there was that gamble with the hard tyres at the start of the Grand Prix that didn't really work. He got nerfed by Tsunoda, and after that he sort of ran long hoping for a safety car that never came, and so that's his race is affected by that, and ultimately his final position is affected by that. Colapinto just it has a 5 because he was just ultimately, we could see what the Alpine was capable of with Gasly, and he just wasn't
quite a
really
long way off.
Yeah, he wasn't really close to that. It wasn't much of a celebration of his new deal, so it's just sort of like 5 is middle. And Sainz just had. I don't want to. Actually, I did nearly give Sainz a 6 because he was driving with damage, but I think it was just a bit of a scruffy weekend. Yes, he came into the weekend feeling unwell, but actually he said that the main mitigating factor during the sprint sessions particularly was the car setup, not his own illness. And he said that he'd come into practice actually feeling pretty good, still a bit under the weather, but he felt the car was good. And then they had to roll back on some of the setup changes because ultimately they were concerned that maybe they were going to wear the floor out too much, or they were going to wear the brakes out too much, or that sort of thing. So they had to be a little bit more conservative, and so the car just wasn't as good after that. So I think that's partly why Williams struggled. And so I think I'll probably just give it to Stroll, just to sort of stop me from rambling here.
Oh, I was going to say the way you described it sounded like you were leaning towards Colapinto, especially if you look at what their teammates did. What do you think, Haydn?
I mean, I'll undo the entire concept, but do we really need to define who finishes?
Well,
yeah,
who's the
out
worst?
of these
Yeah,
5 out of 10. But if I need to pick who is the worst 5, yeah, sure, Colapinto, just for sprint crash as well. That was not. I know Piastri and Hulkenberg obviously went off before him, but that was pretty much undoing of potentially a good race weekend as well. Yeah, whereas the other two were just low key more rather than mistakes outwardly.
Yeah, well, I won't ask Jake or you, Haydn, to pick who should be third out of Oscar Piastri and Lewis Hamilton, both who scored 4 out of 10. And we think we've talked about their weekends pretty well. Unless you guys want to jump in with something, I think we'll move on to the top 2 who are in a clear order, so we can just talk about them. So, in second place with 3 out of 10, really using the range a bit more this weekend. Jake, we like that. Yuki Tsunoda on 3. So, what was what put him down at that score?
Underperformance in a word. I thought it was
obviously.
Yes. Well, that's the reason why. I just thought it was really terrible, to be quite honest. And it was that move on Stroll that was just. I just laughed in the moment. It was.
Did you mark him also? Did you mark him down for giving Red Bull a bad steer on the setup as well, on the basis he was trying to help Max and basically gave him the wrong setup for qualifying?
To be fair, that does have to come into it, doesn't it?
Throw him under the bus.
He sabotaged them on and off the field. Not sabotage, the wrong word. Just, but
no, please, not sabotage. It wasn't deliberate. It definitely wasn't.
No.
Please don't write in.
So, but I just again talking about that. So for those that missed the move that he got the penalty for. He was trying to pass Colapinto at turn 10. Colapinto took quite a wide line. Stroll was on the apex, and Tsunoda just sort of went into him instead. It was really quite funny. I shouldn't laugh, but I'll be honest, I laughed.
I just felt bad for Tsunoda. It's just going from bad to more bad during his time at Red Bull. Like, I genuinely do feel like he's giving it a good go, but it just everything he tries, it isn't working. I know he's inherently quite an aggressive driver when he's racing, but yeah, that wasn't even aggression. It was just being very optimistic that all would work out. And yeah, okay, you can't, as you said in the driver race, you can't knock him down for Red Bull not serving the penalty correctly, but it was just made worse by him having to then serve the penalty again because it wasn't served
Uh,
correctly.
I was watching with my son, and we said, "Oh, you know what happened now is it'll get a pit lane speeding infringement as he comes in to serve the penalty again." But that didn't actually happen, so it could have been worse. But yeah, I mean, we take note. Sorry,
if I may be slightly earnest for a second as well, I think everybody wanted Yuki to do well at Red Bull.
Yes.
And just show that, he's been trying to angle for that seat for so long, and it felt that it was unfair that he'd got passed over for Lawson. It's like, well, let's give him a go. It can't be any worse. And to be fair, it wasn't any worse. But it's just not gone the way that I think he or anyone else had hoped. There hasn't been that progression. There's been that moment where he believes that race pace had got better and he believes that qualifying pace had got better. But on the evidence of this race, it just hasn't. And people spoke about his race weekend in Mexico last weekend. I was possibly a bit harsh about that. He'd, was actually doing quite a lot of heavy lifting to help Max out. But I don't think you can look at his race pace and say that was good. And I don't think you can look at his this weekend and say that was good. And I think this is the point in the season where he needs to be doing strong performances and showing something. And he just isn't doing it, unfortunately. But I think the worst bit is that he believes that he is. And he needs to be a little bit more self-critical, I think.
Yeah, we really hope he does turn it around over the last. I mean, I'd still leave him in the car for next year, but that's a separate podcast discussion probably. But now I want to cast listeners' minds back a few days, perhaps readers of Autosport.com, and in particular Jake, who wrote a fantastic column saying how fabulous Gabriel Bortoleto had been this season and how he was definitely going to be okay with the pressure of racing at home. And fast forward to right now, 2 out of 10, bottom of the pile. Please, JBL, explain how Bortoleto has fallen from favour into Interlagos' home race. I mean, it was a shame to see, wasn't it? I mean, there's so much support and then over so soon.
Yeah, and I wrote in that column, as you say, that mentally he's shown up well this season and that he was equipped to deal with the pressure, but he didn't do that.
It's
your fault. You did the writing equivalent of the commentator's curse.
Yeah,
I think so. I think the amount of outward pressure was a lot more, because it was a lot more than I expected it to be. And I think it was probably a lot more than he expected it to be. I think he thought it was going to be, more fans and more sponsorship obligations. Actually, you've got a lot more. I don't think he was used to the amount of Brazilian media going to his sessions. I don't think he was used to the amount of people that were not just sort of, let's say, common garden fans, but those that had paid thousands of pounds to be in the Paddock Club, all queuing up for his photo and all shouting his name and having songs about him. And I think that's, for a 20-year-old, that's a really weird place to be. Especially like for one that's actually, he's incredibly well adjusted. I think he comes into just something that's completely alien to him, and maybe not under that pressure.
I think that's fair, but I'll tell you something else I thought was weird that I would have found intimidating if I'd been here. Like the number of pictures, even in like the cool-down room, the pictures of Ayrton Senna, like just looking there, like looking at you. I'd find that, obviously, he's a legend of the sport anyway, but in Brazil, he's like proper hero worship. And to have him kind of looking at you, oh, come on, you should be doing better for Brazil. It kind of felt a little bit intimidating. So I did feel a bit sorry for Bortoleto. I don't know what you thought, Haydn. I thought that was a little bit weird.
I know, just the Senna remarks just making me laugh, but probably not things I can say here. A bit of the case of the Antonellis. When obviously he had his Imola, not meltdowns harsh, but just general pressure on him. And yeah, like you guys have just said, he's the sole representation of that nation on the grid, and there's been a while since they've had one. Obviously, Massa most recently, and yeah, Antonelli had the same thing with the Italian pressure on him. Toto Wolff even said it when he was talking about Antonelli's uptick in performances away from Italy and away from the European rounds. And yeah, maybe that was a big contributing factor. And I guess you contrast it to the other rookies, like your Bearman, for example, who's got the cover, let's call it, of Norris, Hamilton, Russell, the big names. But when he turned up at Silverstone, yeah, there was attention for him, but it wasn't everybody wants a picture
Yeah,
with
that's a good
Oliver
point.
Bearman. He is the
Less
greatest thing in
intense.
the world. Um, again, maybe it just comes down to driver mentality, and yeah, we all get impacted by things differently, but yeah, it clearly made an impact on Bortoletto. Feel sorry for him. Wouldn't say there's anything wrong with going for a move down the inside of turn one in the final lap of the sprint. You've just unfortunately got to execute it a little bit better than that went. And then, of course, just learning that harsh lesson of the impact that it had, much greater than it would be if it wasn't a sprint weekend, obviously, because it took him out qualifying, and then he's trying to make up ground very early on the start of the Grand Prix, and just there's a slight misjudgment with Stroll, puts him in the wall. That's it, done and dusted. So yeah, the JBL's rating for him is totally accurate and totally fair. But yeah, context on this is just like, yeah, he'll learn from it, come back. Interesting to see what he's like in 12 months' time when he's back in Brazil for not revenge, but just to show, no, I can handle the pressure. I can do this. And obviously where he'll be as a driver, where that team will be in 12 months' time. They'll obviously be Audi, but generally where the championship picture and how everyone sort of shuffles out with the new regs, because it'll be a long time that in 12 months, and a lot will happen and a lot will change. So yeah, I think he's got a good period now to reflect and come back in 12 months and go, no, I'm the real deal here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, joking aside, I'm sure that Bortoletto will bounce back. So, and I do agree with a lot of what Jake said in his column. So I was being a little bit facetious there. Right, now on to wow, it's my favourite section, or isn't my favourite section. It's either the one I love to hate it or hate to love it. Don't know which way around it is. It's on the limiter, where I get to rant about something that's annoyed me from the Grand Prix. And this one was easy. I knew what this one was going to be before really the race had finished, and that is Oscar Piastri's 10-second penalty for causing a collision at the first corner. Now, where to start with this? But I very much agree with Jamie Chadwick and Kuhn Chantalk's excellent analysis after this, in that, first of all, it's a gap that every racing driver in the world would go for. It's not an arriving late. It's not a do or die on the brakes. He is alongside because Andrea Kimi Antonelli has frankly made a bit of a dog's dinner of getting the restart. So he's got Leclerc on one side, and Piastri, I think, has to go down the left-hand side. And they're alongside enough that they all know that each other is there. They're pretty much neck and neck going into the braking zone. What happens then is that Leclerc, being the sensible chap that he is, gives the two cars on the inside as much, short of actually going off to downtown Sao Paulo. I don't think that he could really have given them any more room. Piastri does lock up, but if you look at the footage in slow motion, he's still got his left hand side on the white line near the curb. He hasn't slid past the apex into Antonelli. Antonelli's basically still turned in like it's his corner. So I wouldn't have given Antonelli a penalty. My main problem with this is, I think it's okay to have racing incidents and just go, that was a racing incident, three cars into one or three cars into two, don't really go. And I think we should be able to say that. And these racing guidelines, I think, are actually causing more trouble than they're worth, because they're going, well, you've got to be alongside at this point and whatever. Doesn't take into effect the context of individual corners. So I thought Piastri's penalty was a load of old nonsense. He shouldn't have got it, and he probably would have finished second without it. So anyone want to disagree with that? He did get a 10-second penalty, ended up in fifth, but I'm pretty convinced that it was a nonsense.
Don't necessarily disagree, because you get on the head with these are the racing rules. These are the stewards have to follow the guidelines, which we're now all aware
Well, they need
of.
to be binned off, don't they? That's the underlying point of this rant, is that the
Yeah.
racing guidelines need to be actually pared back. They're too restrictive on the stewards. I agree with that.
Yeah. So in that sense, yes, you're right. And indeed, even if you take a bit of interpretation, if you have to penalise Piastri, I still think you can lessen the penalty. I know that's in the guidelines, but there's got to be an interpretation level of, they judged him as wholly to blame, which didn't really feel a correct interpretation of it. But that's what they decided, and so be it. But yeah, everything else, I think you nailed on the head. One thing I will say, did we learn nothing from Mexico? Why is Leclerc not cutting turn one flying down turn 4.
Yeah, get on the gas.
Yeah.
Just don't brake. Go straight. You used to be able to do that on the F1 games before they got more sophisticated. You could use the grass in all sorts of places
Exactly.
to get ludicrous lap times. Yeah.
Three wide in Terminal Mexico. They're all fine. It all works out. We have massive controversy on that. They don't do what they did in Mexico. Yeah, Leclerc's out, and we have a different sort of controversy. But yeah, no, I'm not saying that's the way to go about it. But yeah, it is quite funny
No, we don't really like that.
contrasting the two elements. In terms of audience members and what's right and what's wrong and opinion, it still provides debate, just in a totally different angle, just because of the outcome. But yeah, it's just remarkable, really, of how that's come about.
What do you think, Jake? Did you? I mean, I wasn't. To make it clear, I wasn't that surprised he got a penalty. I just thought, yeah, I can see it could or could not be given. And when I first saw it, I thought, I don't think they should, but I think they will. The more times I look at the replay, the more I get more furious. The more times I watch it, actually, the gap between the Mercedes and the Ferrari, Antonelli has definitely got space to use. If Leclerc had been pinching him, but then even then, I think it's probably a racing incident, because I still think that every day of the week, a racing driver goes into the gap that Piastri had.
No, I don't disagree. I think you're absolutely right on the racing incidents should just be allowed to exist sometimes. There seems to be this obsession with culpability, and I don't know if it's I don't think it's I don't know if it's a sort of pressure thing from the growing influence of social media and this expectation that one driver was at fault for everything. I think today's modern world isn't very good at just allowing things to be the things that they are. There always has to be blame apportioned to them. And I think the sort of racing guidelines and racing rules kind of allow that. They and reflect that. And I think there's something that probably needs to be considered, because actually the FIA, or the stewards rather, are very, very good at letting racing incidents on the first lap be racing incidents. But it seems to never extend beyond that. There always seems to be, okay, after this, there always has to be this micro analysis into who's at blame because they put their wheel 1 millimeter in the wrong place, yada, yada, yada. But sometimes things just happen. And I think that was just ultimately a thing that happened. And Piastri locked up, and I think, he shouldn't have done that. I think Antonelli maybe could have given him a bit more space. Piastri kind of went into him. But not through really. It was a little bit his fault, but not a 10-second penalty's worth of a fault, I don't think. So I don't think Piastri had a good race at all, a good weekend at all, rather. But I think that when you look at the mistakes that he made over the weekend, that probably wasn't. It wasn't in the top 3 for sure.
Well, I mean that in itself explains the 4 out of 10, doesn't it? But he could have been second without that, and that would actually have been, if you win championships on your bad days, a second place, given you've been completely outpaced all weekend by your teammate, actually would have been a pretty good save. But because of that penalty and that incident, it's suddenly in 5th and not looking so good. But well, let us know what you think. You can drop. I'm probably going to regret this, but drop me an email, kevin.turner@autosport.com. What did you think of Piastri's penalty? Was there something else from the Grand Prix that you wanted to rant about more and that we've missed? Please do let us know. Well, thanks very much for joining us for this episode of the Autosport F1 podcast. We will be back after the Las Vegas Grand Prix. From Haydn Cobb, Jake Boxall-Legge, and me, Kevin Turner, it's goodbye for now.
Wow.